the other two co-chairs, in case anybody has any questions afterwards. Dr. Drew Ivers from Webster City here in the red tie, and David Fisher waving his hand back here by the bar area. It's really a great time to be an American with all the challenges we have in front of us, and I think when we look at the candidates that are currently running for president, we have a candidate here today that really stands apart from a lot of the other candidates in the field. Many of the candidates talked about voting against increasing the debt ceiling, but there's only one candidate that voted against all the spending in the first place, and that's Congressman Ron Paul. I'd like you guys to show me a little bit of an applause if what I have to say is something you agree with. Are you looking for a president who will follow the Constitution? Are you looking for a president who will respect your Second Amendment rights and who understands that the Constitution was written to protect and defend your liberty? Are you looking for a president who's been married to the same woman for over 50 years and practices his faith through his life? I'm hearing a lot of applause. And I'd like an applause if you're coming to Ames on August 13th to kick off the presidential campaign of Ron Paul in Ames, Iowa, my hometown. Yeah. Ames is a critical juncture for the campaign, and we do have tickets here today, discounted tickets. They're $10 each. On your way out, if you would see Steve Bierfeld and his staff, they're selling tickets. I know a lot of you probably bought tickets on the way in. They're $10. We do have busing from Scott County and surrounding counties, so for those of you who are unable to drive to Ames, we do have transportation for you, so don't let that be something that holds you back. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the champion of the Constitution, Dr. Ron Paul.
Works. Can you hear me in the back? Very good. Well, thank you very much for coming. I'd like to be able to say I came here to sing, but unfortunately you're going to be spared that. That's the good news. But the other part of the message is that I'm going to deliver a message about freedom, because I think that's what we need a lot more of in this country. There's been a lot of talk, especially this past week or two or three, about raising the debt limit so we don't default. And much has been said about what it would be like if we defaulted. But there was never any real concern on my part that the debt limit wouldn't be raised and that we wouldn't default in a way of not sending out the checks and paying for the notes and paying the interest. That was never a thought. But what I am concerned about is the constant defaulting of our government. Because right now, we default by devaluing the currency, which is much, much more dangerous. And that hasn't changed. That has been made much worse because we are just like those individuals who are trying to get out of the hole and digging the hole bigger for ourselves. I never could understand the proposal that for the people who say the debt is the problem, so let's raise the debt limit $2.4 trillion. I found that to not make any sense. That is the reason I voted against it. They kept trying to tell us that this would be very unique and very bad for the markets if we defaulted in the way that they implied. The truth is that our country has defaulted many times on us. The very first time that it was a dramatic default was in the 1930s, in a bad economic times, when they literally took the gold from the American people. And if you had a gold certificate and you go to the government, it says promise to pay 1 ounce of gold for $20. The government just defaulted and ushered in the age of welfareism. I mean, significant changes occurred in the 1930s. But then once again, even though Americans weren't allowed to own gold in 1971, we were still promising that foreigners could turn in $35 and get an ounce of gold. Well, in 1971, the gold window was closed. We went off the pseudo-gold standard, so we defaulted once again. In 1965, if you had a silver certificate, you no longer could go in and get a silver dollar. So once again, the government defaulted on us. So the default is real. It's been done before. If we would not have raised the debt limit, that would have been messy, but it might have called the attention to all the politicians and all the people of this country that we have to change our ways. And today, we are continuing the default. Every time you go to the store or the gas station or whatever, if you think prices are going up, the government is defaulting on you because they're devaluing the currency. Today we have a dollar that is worth 2 cents compared to the dollar that the Federal Reserve inherited in 1913. 1913 wasn't a very good year. We ended up getting the income tax and the Federal Reserve, and as far as I'm concerned, we don't need either one. But somehow or another, we have to cut off spending. The appetite for spending is still there. Yes, the politicians are spending, and the markets want more spending, and everybody thinks that's what we have to continue to do. But the truth is that it will change, because this cannot be sustained. We're too much in debt, and you can't just keep borrowing and printing money. The worst thing about the destruction of a currency, which is the big concern economically that I have, is that it destroys the middle class. And this is a characteristic of the devaluation of a currency. We now have a dollar that's worth 2 cents on the dollar the Federal Reserve inherited in 1913. The Federal Reserve was designed because they said that they should give us stable prices and full employment. And look at what they've given us. Unemployment, constant business cycle, a recession, depression now, that may turn out to be the worst in our history, and some very, very serious conditions. So it has been a total failure. It's failed, I think, very simply, because the people in charge for the last 100 years didn't understand and didn't care and didn't obey the Constitution. The Constitution is explicit. Only gold and silver can be legal tender, and if we'd have done more of that, we would not have had this type of problem that we have today. Some people get a little bit confused on that. How does the Federal Reserve have anything to do with spending? It's because members of Congress don't have to be responsible, and the people who are demanding the programs are involved too, because they get reelected by asking the government for more and more. So the politician votes for the program, and then they tax a bit, but there's never enough. Then they borrow a bit, and there's still never enough, and interest rates tend to go up. So what they do is they send the Treasury bills and the bonds to the Federal Reserve, and they create money out of thin air. And they buy these bonds, so that artificially creates a boom, a bubble. And it is predictable. It's been predictable by the Austrian free market economists. So it was not a surprise to any of us about what happened in 2008. It was destined to happen. But the most important thing to remember is you can't solve that problem we faced in 2008, which came from too much spending, too much borrowing, too much debt, too much regulations, too much printing press money. So it finally dawns on us that there's a major crisis. So what do we do in Washington, the Federal Reserve? We spend more money, borrow more money, print more money, write more regulations. Then they wonder why we haven't come out of the recession. Well, let me tell you, what has happened today is very predictable. Was predictable because we don't need that kind of policy. What we have to do is think about what this country is all about. This country was started in a desire to restrain the British king, because the king was too interfering with our lives and the lives of the colonists and the economy. So they wanted to redefine the role of government. So that's what the Constitution was all about. Redefining the government, saying that the government was there to protect our liberties and to preserve the free marketplace at the same time, to restrain the government. That's what the Constitution is supposed to do. But what if we ended up with? We have a government that acts in secrecy, and your privacy is totally violated constantly. We have it turned upside down. We need to reverse that. We need to think about valuing the Fourth Amendment. We need to think about, what does this Patriot Act mean? What does this mean when we go to the airports and have what happens to us with no need to, that there's no probable cause? So what we as a people need to do is demand our freedom back. That's what we need. Said frequently on those who are, well-intended, saying, well, in order to get out of this, what we need is more sacrifice. We need you to sacrifice and you to sacrifice. And I don't buy into that. I don't think sacrificing anything is beneficial for you. You don't need to sacrifice your liberties, and you don't need to sacrifice any more your money. What we need to do is get the government out of the business of taking care of the special interests. Let them sacrifice, not the American people who are getting bills. Example of this is what happened when the crisis was very evident in 2008. Who made all the money when the bubble was being blown up and people were making money on the derivatives and trading and Wall Street and the banks, and they were making billions of dollars. And then the crisis hit and they go into bank. They become bankrupt. They're so involved, and they tell the people, well, you know what, if we don't bail them out, the country's going to suffer and we're going to have an economic calamity. So the Congress and the Federal Reserve go to town and bail out all the wealthy people. And what happened to the people? What happened to the middle class? The middle class, too many of them lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So this sort of confirms the fact that the Austrian free market economists always said and teach that if you have a destruction of a currency through inflation, through the printing press of money, you wipe out the middle class. And that is a threat to America. And it's a threat to our standard of living. Because we were the freest nation ever, and we were the most prosperous nation ever, and we had a large middle class. And that we're losing. In the last 10 years, we've essentially had no new jobs. Jobs are going overseas. Our country is poor. It's all based on borrowing and all based on debt. So there's going to be a major decision made by us. The people of this country have to decide, once again, what the role of government should be. Just as the colonists decided what the role of government should have been way back. And I don't think the problem is that difficult. I like the idea that government should be there and very small, and that people should have a right to their life, a right to their liberty, a right to keep the fruits of their labor. Because we were the freest nation in the world ever, we were the most prosperous as well. And now we are becoming much poorer because we have lost our way. We have concentrated on the material wealth that comes from freedom, thinking that if we just get the government to redistribute wealth and shuffle this around, we'll all be wealthy and happy. But we forgot about the fundamentals of what makes a free society. And this is what we have to restore. We have to understand what freedom is all about. Freedom comes to us as individuals. We get our life, our lives, and our liberties from our Creator. That's where it comes from, not from our government. The government should be there to protect that. And if the government gets out of the way, we will be prosperous, and we were prosperous. This test of freedom that we had in this country was a small test for a couple hundred years. Freedom is nothing ancient. Totalitarianism is ancient. Every once in a while they'll accuse me, and I'll bet you they've accused a few of you in this room, if you defend it, you say, oh, you people want free markets, you don't care about the poor, and you want to go back to the Dark Ages. Well, I'll tell you what, where the Dark Ages are is where the totalitarians are, and that's where we're moving. Just think of the number of